All right, I decided to go ahead and do a quick update video on my Max Nano. Not many changes since the last video. This was more kind of an informational video that might be useful for some people. Since the last update, not many changes. Most of the corals that I added are doing very well. There's only one that is not doing so well that I'll probably remove. It was one that I knew was kind of iffy for this particular tank, but I gave it a try. I've been surprised before. Other than that, as you can see, a lot of growth on some of these corals. It's still early, so my corals are still in the process of opening up. I have two full branches on my right mind blank, goodness, torch coral, and one new additional branch on the left that's hard to see on my other torch coral. They're doing great. My little tiny micro hammer that I got almost for free is now two separate heads right in the front there. That thing's exploding. Just lots of growth overall. The bird's nest, minimal growth, but most everything else is growing at a pretty good rate. As you can see in the back there, I'm going to have to trim my carpet, the star polyps, because yeah, they're getting close to the intake up there. But that's great. That's a good problem to have. And all I'll do is I'll just take a nice cut right there, clean across the top, and then replace that sheet further to the right so that I am completing my backdrop with star polyps. But the informational part of this video is in regards to overfeeding. And if you take a close look, you can see some spirobid up there along the top and, on the rocks in some places. A couple small little patches of bubble algae that I remove as I see. I think there's one or two still in there now. But mainly on the bottom you can see the algae there, and what you're not seeing is, because no one likes to take a picture of their tank when it's not looking so great, but yeah, I had some extra growth. The algae was getting a little bit out of control on my substrate. The rocks weren't too clean. Excess algae on the back in the glass, and the spirobid worms were getting out of control. And I fell victim to what most people are going to fall victim to one point or another, even advanced. People have been doing this a long time, is, overfeeding. And when you have excess nutrients in the tank, you give your pests all the food they need to grow. In my case, it was just time constraints, right? I have work and I have a family, and it's difficult to stay on top of things and do everything, the right way all the time. And what I do is that got me is 3 times a week I feed frozen mysis and spirulina. And even though, it has the gel binders and is supposed to be decrease on the particulate matter, I thaw mine in a small medicine cup with a small amount of distilled water, which I recommend. Now, optimally, you find a way to put the mysis and the spirulina into the tank without pouring any of the liquid in, because what happens is even with the gel binders, when you dissolve, there's so much particulate matter in that distilled water when you thaw it out in there. So what I would do is I would pour a small amount, just enough for the fish to eat, but that would just put a cloud of micronutrients in there. And that's exactly what your spirobid worms and algae want. Okay, that's what they feed off of. That's what they need. That's their filter feeders. And so, yeah, long story short, I just one day I was looking at my tank and it's like, oh my gosh, look, it's a mess. I got tons of algae growing on my substrate. I got spirobid all over the place. And what I love is I can show you that when your tank's in good shape and you're generally taking good care of it, if you know what you're doing wrong, you correct it. You don't have to do any insane cleaning or anything to reverse it and show results. And so what you're seeing here is I didn't go to my substrate. I didn't remove large chunks of the algae because it's on the substrate. I'd have to remove the substrate. I did scrape off some of the spirobid worms, but a lot of what you're seeing right here is along the top there. When you look along the top there, there's just spirobid everywhere. You could see more on the rocks. You could see more algae. There's algae all along the front. You're seeing decrease in all of this without me having to manually remove it. So just correcting the overfeeding problem. My fish are eating the algae, chomping at it. I got my blenny in there. The wrasse is great at knocking off some of the spiral worms and some of those pests. And so just correcting the overfeeding problem has decreased all of the negative pests in there. And of course, I'll manually remove some more myself because it doesn't hurt. But first, you got to get it under control. And so, yeah, overfeeding is a big issue. It causes a lot of problems in our tanks. And so what I do now is I thaw out my frozen food. I put it in the medicine cup, and I take a toothbrush. I just use this toothbrush right here because this is quick for me. I just dip the toothbrush in, shake it off, and all that will be on the bristles is the mysis shrimp and the thick meatier items that I want the fish to eat, but a lot less of the fine particulate matter that's gonna go to the filter feeders. And so now I just put a little bit in there, and it's very easy to control now the amount that I put in there. And so, yeah, solved my problem pretty quickly. It takes a little more time, but it's not so much that it's hard for me to get on with my day. So yeah, it's just a good idea. Remember that overfeeding in your reef tank can be disastrous, and that gets a lot of people. A lot of people don't realize the reason they have all this hair algae, and the reason they have all or any kind of algae or spiral worms everywhere. These pests have to feed on something, and especially when you're talking about spiral worms, you're not. It's not light. They don't feed. Algae grows with light, not the spiral worm. So when you got all that going on, when you got a lot of the pests growing real well, anything that's a known filter feeder, you're overfeeding. And I think it's easy when you thaw those little frozen cubes in a cup to think, well, I only poured so much in and everything I saw got eaten. Yeah, but the problem is if you thaw it out and it's in liquid and you pour that liquid in there is a ton of micronutrients you can't see that's getting poured in there, even if you're only pouring a tiny small amount in. So just food for thought. In terms of, I think that's just one thing that's easy especially for new people, but even people who have been doing it a long time. It's just easy to make the mistake of overfeeding in your tank. So, yep, other than that, like I said, the tank is doing great. And, I'm going to have to frag these torches probably here in a couple months. And the good news is, in this hobby, when you have to frag things like your torches, well, those are worth a lot of money. So don't forget that. If you have a successful tank, at least you can reclaim some of that cash flow later on down the road when you do some things like fragging. I can even frag my star polyps, since they grow so fast. And if you remember, those are little quarter-sized patches, and now they're just spreading like crazy. So, as always, any questions, feel free to ask. And, yeah.